Well, we're back to clear skies here, very typical of a La Nina pattern. Here's the surface map for this afternoon. It is definitely a lot more active than what we've seen over the past couple weeks. Very deep cyclone in the Great Lakes region. And on the backside, northwesterly flow with snow and some blowing snow. And out in New England, we've got this line of showers moving into New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts this afternoon, with some of that trailing all the way down into Florida. Now, one thing that we immediately see on this map, and I want to draw your attention to the thickness lines, that's going to be these dashed red and blue lines. That's kind of like a mean temperature in the lowest 3 kilometers. The red colors are above 540 decameter. That indicates the column is probably above freezing. And on the other side, blue indicates that the column from 0 through 3 kilometers is probably below freezing. And that means on this side, we're much more likely to get wintry weather. But you can also use this as a guide to roughly what the temperatures are like. For example, we can see that the atmosphere is roughly about the same temperature in Alberta as it is in the Texas Panhandles. A little bit cooler at the surface up there, but still the principle holds. Now, when we look at that pattern, what we see is this large area of cold air advection. In fact, the core of it, that appears to be over Wisconsin right there. That is the core of the polar air, and it appears there's a little bit more to the north in Manitoba. But if you look at those depressed values, they kind of run like that, and that corresponds to the influx of cold air coming into the Great Lakes region, and not so much out in the high plains. So the main thrust of that cold air is into the Great Lakes region. And that's the reason that the temperatures in the Appalachians and the Mississippi River Valley are not really that cold. Now, what we also see is that some of it does spread all the way down into Texas. That's reinforcing the southerly front down in the Gulf Coast region and this backdoor front around Phoenix and Tucson. And you can see the north winds there at El Paso. So that's part of the cold air mass. I should say that's a series of cold air masses. You can see the remains of one outbreak down to the south, and here's a fresh incursion moving through the Central Plains. So, yeah, Las Vegas, north winds under the influence of weak polar air. And another sign of that is in the San Joaquin Valley, some fog around Sacramento. Now, typically we do not see that in a pure tropical environment. That indicates that either there's polar air in place or polar air is transitioning over to warm air, with warm air in the mid-levels forming an inversion. If we take a look at a sounding for the Sacramento area, yeah, we can see that there's a inversion, some trapping of moisture and cool air beneath, and above that looks like some tropical air starting to return once again. Moving out into the Pacific, looks like we've got a fresh incursion of polar air moving inland, and this is that antifront setup. And if we take a look at antifronts in Google, you can see a few examples of that. Yeah, there's one right there. You can see the rain falling in the rear of the frontal system, and that's what we have there in Oregon and Washington. Further up north, some turbulent weather in the Gulf of Alaska, and some very cold weather starting to settle in across Alaska itself. Minus 24 up there northwest of Fairbanks. It is fairly mild in parts of the Bering Sea, the coastal regions, 20s in that region, but this does indicate that some areas of the interior have been subjected to strong radiational cooling. Still continued warm in northern Canada. These 20s are definitely mild for this time of year, but as you go further north, we get into some of the cooler air, minus 22 at Eureka, I think that's off the screen. Yeah, there you go. Minus 22 there. So some intense cold air starting to develop and some 1060 millibar readings starting to appear in Greenland. And you can see the downslope katabatic winds along the west coast. Then returning to the east coast to the Atlantic, got a major weather system out there, 964 millibar low with a large precip region. So that's causing some hazards to the merchant marine industry. And this is almost kind of like a pattern that we saw with the sinking of the Titanic. Strong cold air advection and high pressure starting to move in. So yeah, it's pretty similar to what they had with that event back in, I think, 1914, 1913, somewhere around there. So that's what it looks like on the GFS chart. Looks very familiar, doesn't it? There's the core of the cold air across Wisconsin. Let's pull up a skew-t right in the middle of that. We should see some steep lapse rates. Yeah, there they are. Steep all the way up to the tropopause, which is down at about 25,000 feet. And if you're flying over the Great Lakes at 30,000 or 35,000 feet, you're up there in the stratosphere. And with that, of course, you get an extra dose of ozone, which is known to be a carcinogen, or so I've read. All right, checking in on our atmospheric rivers from UCSD. This is definitely a good thing to do to keep your skills fresh and recognize when you have an unusual event. Now, what we have this afternoon, this band of 500 to 600 IVTs spreading into northern Oregon and Washington. And just running that forward, some weakening on that. And here comes the next plume on Sunday. That's got some healthy values up near 1,000, but heading more towards Seattle, Victoria, and Vancouver. Then here comes another band into the Northern California for the 15th and 16th. That one looks a little bit weaker. And then after that, it looks like we get some high pressure, maybe a bit of ridging covering the west coast. Today's tour of weather around the country is sponsored by But You're a Horse. Yeah, I have no idea, guys. I guess Harlequin romance novels are just not the same as what they were back in the 70s. In the southwestern U.S., looks like a beautiful day. No sign of any clouds except in the San Joaquin Valley. And we can see a little bit of old snowpack in the Sierra Nevadas. Here's a look at Central California, and if we go back to the overnight hours, go to the infrared imagery, notice that the fog does not show up at all. Interesting. That's because the fog is about the same temperature as the ground. And if we roll that forward, visible imagery pops up, and there it is. There's the fog. So how could we have detected that? Oh, that's a little interesting feature right there, probably a contrail. Let's run that back and go to the NT microphysics. Yeah, this is what you should have been using. There's that fog. And you can see that as we move into the daytime hours, we can no longer use the NT microphysics because it's overwhelmed by solar radiation. And that's when we switch over to the visible channel. And putting it all together, there it is. You can see the fog kind of building in and then burning off starting around 11 or 12. Standing lenticular cloud forms back on the menu out here in the lee of the Cascades. So certainly some turbulence in the mid-levels in that part of the country. And then further back, there's the anafront cloud structure from Portland southwestward off into the Pacific Ocean. And there's Washington underneath multiple cloud canopies and getting some rain there in the Seattle area. And some of that rain spilling all the way over the Cascades into the Great Basin region. Looking at the high plains, there's our powerful weather system. And you can see that cold air advection coming down through Minnesota and the Dakotas. A lot of stratocumulus. Most of this is going to be low-level cloud, but there's a little bit of maybe mid-cloud right in there. And we do know that there's not as much cold air advection as we go west. So the high plains kind of escaped the brunt of this system, most of that heading into the Great Lakes. A little bit of frontogenesis responsible for this cloud formation from Cincinnati down through Memphis, El Dorado, Arkansas, Shreveport. But overall, the air mass in this region is fairly dry. We are nonetheless getting some cold air advection in Texas and more of it in Tennessee and the Mississippi River Basin. There's the southeastern U.S. under dry west or northwest flow. This cloudiness probably associated with the original frontal boundary down there in Florida and off the Atlantic coast. And then up in the northeastern U.S., there goes the outgoing MCS. We are catching a bit of the transition over to nighttime. And using our memory, we know that the cold front is running about like that, the warm front somewhat like that, and then we have an occlusion spreading further north. So most of our baroclinicity is going to be there in Massachusetts. A lot of overrunning across Maine, Quebec, and New England. And then in the wake of these fronts, we have some dry air advection moving in. That is the dry slot. We can see that a little bit better on the water vapor imagery. Yep, there it is. Strong subsidence right in this area here. And then as you get further back towards the west, we get more into the cold core effects. And that gives us a spectacular weather picture for this Friday afternoon. Let's take a look at our temperature records for this afternoon. We can see that, we do have tropical air in place over the Mojave Desert. Southern California, we got Camarillo with 89 degrees, tying the record set in 1974, and we're expecting 90s in Palm Springs and close to 90 in Yuma, and even a little bit of warm conditions out there in the Willamette Valley and near Olympia. On the East Coast, a warm day there, 66, close to the New York City area, and 71 tying the record at Wallops Island, Virginia. Here's the forecast for Saturday. Continued warm in southern Arizona and in the Mojave Desert. Looks like, what is that, WJF? Yeah, I got to look that up. Skyvector.com, a good site to check out weird identifiers. WJF, that's Lancaster. That's just north of Los Angeles, close to Edwards Air Force Base. And it looks like they're breaking the record for tomorrow up near 80. So what this is telling us is that this area here, underneath a tropical air mass. And another thing of note, minimum temperatures, none being set. A little bit surprising, but I guess areas up north are returning to their seasonal normals. Here's the forecast conditions on Sunday. Yeah, we're coming close to records all along the West Coast. Any plot that you see on here is within 4 degrees of the high temperature, the highest reading set on that date. So Palm Springs will probably tie the record set in 2007, and lots of tropical air in store. And here's a sneak peek for Monday. Tucson coming up to 87, 88 at Yuma, 68 at Reno, and even some very warm conditions showing up in Idaho and Montana. This is indicating ridging building in across the western states. So how about we put that forecast together? Moving forward into tomorrow, looks like some moderation of the cold air in the Midwest. And we've got this other system traversing the northern plains. I don't know if you can see that, but that's the low pressure area. Looks like a warm front right there and a cold front running something like that. That's that same system that we saw on the West Coast on the opening chart. So that's moving across the northern plains, the warm sector being pulled into the Dakotas. And then going into Sunday, we got ourselves an Alberta clipper moving into Illinois. So return to a little bit of wintry weather there, indicating snow in Milwaukee, Detroit, Fort Wayne. And then going into Monday, we already know from the temperature maps that this entire area here is under ridging. So the basic pattern for early Monday is running about like that. Here's that other system coming out of the Midwest into the eastern U.S. Some inclement weather there. Gusty, blustery winds for Virginia, New Jersey. And then going into midweek next week, another powerful system coming into Portland, Oregon, Seattle. Looks like some strong downslope in the high plains, the Rockies. So if you're flying into Denver Monday or Tuesday, it looks like a lot of turbulence. Going into midweek, we've got ourselves another powerful system coming through the Rockies. That's it right there. Warm sector extending south. A lee side trough down into Texas, and possibly the dry line getting established in that region. And then going into Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, some more cold air coming south. This is around the 120-hour point, so this is not the GFS cold bias. Very likely that is going to happen. And some of that cold air coming all the way into the Great Basin region. So it's got depth and it's got pretty good punch coming south. So that'll move almost all the way to the Gulf Coast by Thursday or Friday. And then some weakening of the pattern. Maybe a little upper air system coming across Missouri for Friday next week. And just more cold weather. Very classic La Nina pattern. Maybe not so much for the West Coast where it's been kind of stormy. But yeah, look at that there. That's going to be on Saturday next week. Possible nor'easter. We'll have to kind of keep our eyes on that. Looks a little bit warm there. A lot of that liquid precip field coming pretty far inland. So at this time, it does not really look like a snowstorm. Maybe some flurries and yeah, maybe even a few bands of snow in Massachusetts towards Sunday. And then we're getting into psychic territory. Models are not going to handle that very well, but this is indicating possibly a very strong southern stream system, typical of a El Nino pattern. And that'll be moving through the southern U.S. a couple days before Thanksgiving. And look at that 540 decameter contour coming all the way south. GFS thinking maybe some mixed rain and snow around Fort Worth. So we'll see about that. And here's a sneak peek at the new Weather Analysis and Forecasting Handbook. This is not on our website just yet. We're going to be setting this up very shortly and hopefully have copies ready to sell in December. The content, 340 pages, some of the chapters extensively revised, especially the numerical modeling chapter, the radar chapter, and so on. I don't know what the price on this is going to be exactly. I know that everything seems to be going up. Our printer is putting us in a squeeze here, and I don't know what's going on with this inflation, but hopefully we can get the prices settled out. I would suggest that if you're looking to buy books on our website at weathergraphics.com, you may want to do so quickly because we are going to be raising prices to keep up with the cost of printing. Anyway, hopefully you all have some copies of this new book in the months ahead. And that's all for this edition of Forecast Lab. I want to thank our newest supporter, Betsy. Thank you very much for the Patreon contribution. It really means a lot to me to have viewers like you supporting this channel. So we'll be back on Monday for the supporters and Wednesday for everybody else. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.